I don't know how many people knew it, but this city was in serious trouble before Katrina.
They knew that it was going to be 150,000 people in this city, predominantly black, that didn't have a means to leave. And they didn't try to get them out.
For the rest of your life, you just better just kind of take care of your community, because there's nobody going to take care for you.
They bombed the side of that canal. They did that. Yeah, they did that. You can't murder babies and old people and have no semblance of peace in your life.
They were shooting at us. Now, that's people fleeing a disaster.
If you don't let the poor people back in this city and give them a decent place, New Orleans will never come back again.
And what will be left will be a smaller, richer, whiter New Orleans controlled by conservative forces that wanted to get rid of those poor black folk from the very beginning.
Mardi Gras, with its raucous reveling and festive parades. For 150 years, Mardi Gras has been the frolicking face of fun that masked a racial and social divide in New Orleans that most of the nation and the rest of the world hardly ever saw. But that all changed on August 29, 2005, when Hurricane Katrina brought the full force of her wrath down on New Orleans, unmasking it and revealing its desperate and disadvantaged poor and forgotten. The world watched in horror as thousands of disadvantaged New Orleanians waited, some perilously perched on rooftops, begging for help, pleading to be rescued from a swirling brew of toxic water as high as 15 feet or higher.
Sound carry-on water, and that's all you could hear. People beating on anything. You know, to let people know, hey man, I'm alive, somebody come and help me.
Even after it was abundantly clear that Hurricane Katrina's fury and the massive flooding that followed had trapped more than 100,000 victims, the federal government's response was embarrassingly slow and inexcusably inefficient. The poorest and most vulnerable of the city's residents were left to fend for themselves. It left those who watched the horror shaking their heads in disbelief.
I never would have thought that American citizens would die on their roofs. Would wait 5 and 6 days for food and water. I never would have thought that mothers would be separated from their sons and daughters and put on different buses to different cities, not knowing where they were going. I never would have thought that people would suffer from starvation and dehydration. I never would have thought that our women and children would have had to go to use the bathroom in the middle of the street.
And it all happened as the rest of the world watched in shock and amazement. As many as 25,000 people, mostly poor and black, and who were stuck in New Orleans, took the advice of Mayor Ray Nagin and made their way on their own to the Superdome. Others went to the Morial Convention Center. They also were told to bring enough food and water to last a couple of days. 4 days later, the shelters of last resort would be the scenes of chaos and calamity. At the time, the head of Homeland Security, Michael Chertoff, told a radio interviewer that he, Chertoff, was unaware that 2,000 people were without food and water at the convention center, even though the pictures of it had been broadcast around the world.
Even after the pictures began to surface and the cameras began to roll and the narrative was told, America still didn't get in there until 5 days later.
Even FEMA Director Michael Brown, the man Chertoff appointed to oversee the federal response to the Gulf Coast disaster, said he too had just been told of the crisis. Critics were astonished. They couldn't believe that the government's own point man on the ground was unaware that thousands were without food, water, and toilets for days. The Superdome itself proved no match for the power of Katrina, which ripped parts of the skin off the top of the dome and sent showers of water inside the stadium and onto the people that the Superdome was supposed to protect.
You might have been able to leave with a garbage bag full of a few things in it, but mostly you left with the clothes that were on your back, and that's what you had.
With little more than the clothes on their backs, frightened and frustrated residents frantically waited for the government to respond to their desperate needs. At the same time, there were reports of widespread lawlessness outside and inside the facilities, including accounts of filthy living conditions, rapes, fights, and murders. But subsequent investigations proved those allegations were greatly exaggerated. However, there were at least a dozen deaths, nearly all of them from natural causes, but it was the way the victims died that shamed America and reduced its image to that of a third world nation.
Yeah, I've lived in Africa for some time as well, and it's a very similar experience, especially how we were talking earlier about the lack of government involvement in doing anything positive, and the people having to sustain themselves and do things on their own. So it's very similar. There's a lot of parallels.
Was it deliberate? Did the government lack the urgency because the victims were poor and black?
If it would have happened to any other race in this country, it'd be outrage. But where's the outrage behind it happened to us?
That's right. In his latest book, Come Hell or High Water, Hurricane Katrina and the Color of Disaster, University of Pennsylvania professor Michael Eric Dyson declares that there is little doubt that race and politics played a central role.
If a bunch of people looked like Barbara Bush were floating in a toxic stream in New Orleans, the gut instinct of the government and its officials who have mothers who look like her would have transcended any restriction of law, constitution, or design of the government, and an immediate response would kick in.
President George W. Bush denied it. But what is undeniable, according to Failure of Initiative, a House Republican report released February 15, 2006, is that federal officials, from the president on down to local officials, failed to heed the warnings of a pending catastrophe. The report says there clearly was a failure of leadership, organizational paralysis, or more precisely, bureaucratic inertia that caused death, injury, and suffering.
Here we are, looking at one of the most abominable spectacles of the racial imagination, one of the lowest points of American democracy, where it has abandoned its obligation to its citizens, where it has fundamentally repudiated their humanity.
After a barrage of criticism over the government's inept handling of the Katrina crisis, the target became FEMA Director Michael Brown. 2 weeks after Katrina struck and facing allegations that he falsified portions of his resume, Brown resigned. He also cast blame for the slow response on Louisiana Governor Kathleen Blanco and Mayor Nagin, while accusing the media of making him the scapegoat. However, Brown stayed on at the agency as a contractor to assist FEMA in assessing where the government went wrong in its response to Hurricane Katrina. But by November 2005, Brown had quit the government again, this time for good. When it was all said and done, Michael Brown would be the only government official to get the axe for bungling the Katrina response. By January 2006, Brown was publicly defending his performance during Katrina through a series of speeches and interviews. This time, Brown was accepting more responsibility for what went wrong, but he also shifted blame to the Department of Homeland Security. Brown asserting that because of the department's focus on fighting terrorism, the resources needed by FEMA to effectively respond to natural disasters were not there. Brown also contradicted earlier claims by the White House that it was unaware of breached levees in New Orleans.
For them to now claim that we didn't have awareness of it, I think is just baloney.
The White House first suggested it was not aware of any possibility that levees would be breached. But months after Hurricane Katrina, and after considerable pressure from the media and members of Congress, the White House was forced to admit otherwise. The proof that the president knew was evident in this videotaped briefing held a day before Katrina slammed into New Orleans. On the tape, the president is briefed by National Hurricane Center Director Max Mayfield. The president is told in no uncertain terms that Katrina would wreak havoc on the Gulf Coast and that New Orleans levees would be topped by a huge surge. Somehow it seems impossible that the White House and FEMA could not have known the potential deadly impact of a powerful Category 5 hurricane. A year earlier, in 2004, FEMA itself hired a private company out of Baton Rouge to conduct a mock response drill to a fictitious Category 4 hurricane hitting New Orleans. That study concluded that such a storm, with winds of 130 miles per hour, would easily top the levees. The result would be widespread death and destruction. The study proved to be foreboding. In the wake of Katrina, the controversy over the government's colossal failure only intensified, led by Nation of Islam leader Minister Louis Farrakhan. Minister Farrakhan accused government at all levels of systematically ignoring the plight of New Orleans poor. He also issued a strong warning to those leaders as to what could happen if they don't respect the wishes of those who've been displaced.
I want to tell President Bush and Governor Blanco and Mayor Nagin, if you don't let the poor people back in this city and give them a decent place, New Orleans will never come back again. Because just when you think you got enough, something worse than Katrina coming back on you.
A series of congressional hearings and investigations were launched. The bottom line, nearly every official who needed to know from the White House on down was informed, early and often, as to the potential danger, destruction, and death of what indeed turned out to be the nation's worst natural disaster. As with most hurricanes, Katrina formed quietly enough, but it wasn't long before she began to leave her destructive mark. On August 23, 2005, Katrina was identified only as a tropical depression over the Bahamas. Within 24 hours, she was upgraded to a tropical storm with sustained winds of 75 miles per hour. On Thursday, August 25th, Katrina was upgraded again, this time to Category 1 and Hurricane Katrina. Still packing winds of 75 miles per hour, she makes landfall along the Florida coast. Tracking westward over the state, Katrina dumped heavy rain, caused considerable flooding, and left 14 people dead. By Friday, as it headed over the Gulf of Mexico, forecasters warned that Katrina would take a direct bead on Louisiana, and that prompted Governor Blanco to declare a state of emergency.
Some streets and roads will be flooded. They may not be passable. Trees will be down. Power will be out.
By Saturday, August 27th, Hurricane Katrina's intensity had grown to a Category 3. By mid-morning, local parish officials around New Orleans were calling for voluntary and, in some cases, mandatory evacuations of their residents. And while Mayor Nagin warned residents of the serious potential from Katrina, he held off on ordering a mandatory evacuation. He would do that on Sunday. But by then, it would be too late for the thousands of poor residents. Instead, the mayor advised them to make their way to the Superdome. That evening, National Hurricane Center Director Max Mayfield used a video conference to brief President Bush, along with the governors of Louisiana and Mississippi, and Mayor Nagin on the latest Katrina developments.
I don't think anyone can tell you with any confidence right now whether the levees will be topped or not, but that's obviously a very, very grave concern.
I want to assure the folks at the state level that we are fully prepared.
The news was dire. Katrina was growing bigger and more dangerous. By Sunday, August 28th, the world knew Katrina had reached a Category 4 intensity. And by the time the mayor and governor called a news conference at 9:30 a.m., Katrina was already a Category 5 hurricane with lethal winds of up to 175 miles per hour. It had gusts upwards of 215 miles per hour. Mayor Nagin confessed that, quote, "We're facing the storm most of us have feared. This is going to be an unprecedented event." Pressured by the White House and FEMA, Nagin finally ordered a mandatory evacuation.
Every person is hereby ordered to immediately evacuate the city of New Orleans.
The National Weather Service is predicting devastating damage. What had been feared and expected was about to be realized. On Monday morning, August 29th, Katrina was coming ashore towards New Orleans. The waters rose on both sides of the Industrial Canal, and the lower Ninth Ward was already under 8 feet of water. The 17th Street Canal had breached, and that sent 10 feet of water into St. Bernard Parish. With the situation deteriorating by the hour, the governor ordered 70 school buses from unflooded parishes into New Orleans to start the evacuation of residents stuck in the city. Meanwhile, about the same number of city school buses, which could have been used to evacuate residents before the storm hit, were now waterlogged and useless. 80% of New Orleans was now underwater, and stranded residents were dying.
They knew that it was going to be 150,000 blacks in this city, that people in this city, predominantly black, that didn't have a means to leave, and they didn't try to get them out.
The city's communication system was washed out. Local law enforcement was in disarray. Many police officers were left to make life or death decisions on their own.
There was a serious breakdown in leadership within the police department, and when leadership goes, then everything else is going to break down, and you're going to have total disarray. And this is what happened shortly after Katrina.
Thomas says that rank-and-file officers simply lost faith in their department's commanders.
They felt that they were left to fend for themselves, and many of them were trapped in high waters in New Orleans East and other part of the city. There were no shift changes. You know, everyone was there on duty 24/7.
Several dozen New Orleans police officers walked away from their jobs and were subsequently fired. The floodwaters from the ruptured levee system poured in unabated. The flood walls, which were designed to offer the last line of protection to those least able to protect themselves, had now left them vulnerable.
It rolled in here like somebody put the Atlantic on the corner.
They were saying it was raising 1 hour, a foot an hour. That water was raising a foot every 20 minutes. Because the water got to here when I told my brother and my nephew, I said, "Get up, bro, we got to go."
The New Orleans levee system has long been a source of contention, especially given the city's tragic history of hurricanes. It was hoped that the levees would shield New Orleans against assaults from hurricanes and the surges they bring. The levees would be a necessity for New Orleans, a city that sits from 5 to 10 feet below sea level, sunk in what is called a geographical bowl and surrounded by water. Lake Pontchartrain to the north, Lake Borgne to the east, and the mighty Mississippi River to the south. The job of designing and overseeing the construction of the levees would be assigned to the Army Corps of Engineers. Over the years, the Corps faced a series of obstacles trying to build the levee system. Chief among them was determining how high the levees should be. But in using what some scientists say were outdated hurricane models, the Corps' levee designs actually left New Orleans susceptible to ever-increasing storm surges caused by stronger and stronger hurricanes. Critics point out that the Corps apparently ignored revised worst-case scenario hurricane models. Those models showed that New Orleans would be unprotected against a catastrophic Category 4 or Category 5 hurricane. They also showed hurricanes that powerful would bring surges above 18 feet. Still, the Corps insisted on building levees and flood walls that in most cases would only protect against surges of up to 16 feet. The levees and flood walls were simply no match for Hurricane Katrina. According to New Orleans City Councilman Oliver Thomas, Katrina's attack punched holes all along the levee system.
You had a lot of water coming from, seemed like a lot of places.
A lot of people don't realize they had about 20-something breaches.
Those breaches have been called the largest civil engineering disaster in U.S. history. Within hours, it left 80% of New Orleans covered with water. Investigators at the National Science Foundation now say that the breaches were caused by weak soil beneath the flood walls that eroded as the canals began filling with water. Breaches at the 17th Street and London Avenue canals sent waves of water over much of the city, while the breach in the Industrial Canal destroyed the mostly black Ninth Ward. The ferocious waves of water pushed this huge barge right through the canal wall.
This is a reminder of what didn't have to happen. All of the very pain and all of the history and the best of human possibilities and the worst of human failure. And the water rush just came and just swept many of these structures off the ground completely and just moved them and moved vehicles and moved trees and just completely demolished them. We don't know what's underneath all that rubble, but we suspect that some of our people are still underneath some of this stuff.
Indeed, more than 6 months later, officials confirmed they were still finding the dead in the rubble of these homes in the lower Ninth Ward. Hundreds of bodies were still missing and may never be found. For displaced loved ones who survived Katrina, there may never be closure.
Never know what happened to the loved one who's missing, to never have a funeral, to never have finding remains.
But the major question remains. Why did the Corps go ahead with questionable levee designs? Was it because of reduced federal funding for the projects by the Bush administration? In fact, just before Katrina, the Corps saw $71 million taken out of its already depleted budget as the Bush administration diverted more and more money toward the war in Iraq and less money toward natural disaster relief here at home. A commonly held belief is that the Iraq War also put an added financial burden on the Katrina recovery effort. To make matters worse, the federal government's General Accountability Office says that just as troubling is the amount of waste and mismanagement displayed by FEMA in the awarding of millions of dollars in no-bid contracts after Katrina. Congressional auditors found that of the more than 700 contracts valued at $500,000 or greater, more than half were awarded without competitive bidding or that they came with open-ended terms. Among politically connected companies named were Bechtel Corporation and Kellogg Brown & Root, a subsidiary of Halliburton, Vice President Dick Cheney's old company. As in any disaster of this magnitude, there are the inevitable conspiracy theories. The one that has grown loudest since Katrina is the notion that someone authorized the levees to be deliberately blown.
They bombed the side of that canal. They did that. Yeah, they did that. And I don't even have to get excited about it. You can't murder babies and old people and have no semblance of peace in your life. It's going to be revealed, and it's going to be in my lifetime.
Such opinions often find their basis in the historic Mississippi floods of 1927, which were caused by weeks of steady, heavy rainfall. But it was the so-called Great Storm of Good Friday that pummeled New Orleans. The storm delivered the most rainfall the city had ever recorded. And with downtown New Orleans threatened, the governor of Louisiana, responding to pressure from city fathers, ordered the levees blown. Downtown was saved, but floodwaters swamped the southern part of the city, destroying black and poor communities in the process.
Whether it was blown up or whether it was broken, there's a lot of theories on that, and you can, whatever your mentality is, but it had no business breaking anyway.
The Army Corps of Engineers vehemently denies that anyone deliberately sabotaged the levees at any time during Hurricane Katrina.
This neighborhood wasn't supposed to flood. See, this is the whole thing. None of this wasn't supposed to happen.
These New Orleans East residents say they were forced to flee their homes after a torrent of floodwater slammed into their homes.
We put food in a shopping cart and pushed it because we realized we didn't have no help. So the water was starting, it was killing the fish, so it's time to get out the water.
Losel Carrier says after fleeing his home, he was lucky enough to find a hotel room here in the French Quarter, which suffered very little, if any, flooding.
Just by luck and no planning. This man, I get to the French Quarter on the 4th floor, 200-year-old building. Man, why y'all going there? That building's going to collapse. Stood there 3 days in that drop of water. Didn't even know they had a storm.
Carrier says despite the damages to his home, he's determined to stay in his neighborhood, but he and his friends say they are not holding their breaths, waiting on help from the government.
From now on, for the rest of your life, you just better just kind of take care of your community, because there's nobody going to take care for you. But no matter how much taxes you pay, no matter how much you do give into the city, it's not going to take care of you. So really, they've showed us straight in the face that you're on your own.
In this same neighborhood, the Nation of Islam's Mosque number 46 was among the thousands of buildings destroyed by Katrina. Many of its members are also scattered across what has now become the new black diaspora.
Right now, the vast majority of our community, they're not returning. So we are basically in that rebuilding process, to begin to go back. But as I see it as an opportunity to prove the quality of our faith.
Months after floodwaters rampaged over New Orleans, mountains of crushed and twisted debris still cover nearly all of the city's lower 9th Ward. This footage was shot from a helicopter hired by the Final Call newspaper for the express purpose of viewing the devastation in the lower 9th Ward. Little, if anything, has changed since the water was removed. And even this footage cannot adequately convey the true nature of the destruction that leveled the 9th Ward and displaced thousands upon thousands of its residents.
We need to clean up the environment. We need to do the housing. We need to do the schools. We need to do the health care. It should not have taken that long. That's the most troubling thing to me. When we look at uptown and see it working and functioning, we look at downtown and it looks like it did 6 months ago. That's troubling.
In the massive exodus of Katrina survivors, as many as 150,000 New Orleanians were scattered over 43 different states. With so little being done to restore their neighborhoods, many were left wondering whether or if they would ever get the chance to return to the places they knew and loved.
So many families have lost so much. This is unlike anything else. And so many families cannot go back and retrieve anything. All is gone.
Katrina also washed away most of the independent black businesses, including banks, bookstores, and restaurants. Among New Orleans' most revered black business owners are Dookie and Leah Chase, owners of Dookie Chase's restaurant. Though badly battered by Katrina, the Chases say they feel an obligation to the community to reopen their famed eatery.
I feel that more than Dookie Chase on that corner, I got a community to build. Look around me. I'm nobody. So I got to build this community, and that's what I tried to do all the years I was there. People would say, you ought to go on this side of town, and you ought to go on that side of town. I'm staying on this. This is where I belong. This is where I feel comfortable. This is what I'm all about. I got to build my own people. I got to service my own people first. And then the others will come, and that uplifts my people too.
The 83-year-old restaurant matriarch is especially concerned about the thousands of public housing residents who lived across the street who fled Katrina. Most of their homes sustained only first-floor damage. So she questions, why weren't they repaired quickly?
It was better than the shacks that was there, so it did serve a purpose. It withstood storm after storm. Katrina's the only one that put water on the first floors.
Prior to Hurricane Katrina, black residents made up nearly 70% of the population of New Orleans. With so many now displaced, some of the city's business and political elite have put forth a controversial urban plan called footprint reduction. Very little discussion has explored rebuilding or restoring low-income housing. Instead, most of the talk has been about replacement with expensive condos. Essentially the elimination of large sections of black neighborhoods. Opponents cynically call it Katrina cleansing.
There is a segment of this community that thinks they're going to get rid of everybody. But there's a part of me that just doesn't think they understand what's going to happen, and I think they're underestimating the fact that people are a lot more engaged than they think they are.
Some black leaders fear that white developers and Republican Party operatives would use the plan to seize the Crescent City, since New Orleans is the last Democratic Party stronghold in the state of Louisiana.
That changes the political demographics of this city, and we see Louisiana going solidly Republican because we have been displaced.
Several studies appear to confirm that a full 3 years after Katrina scattered New Orleanians across the country like seeds in the wind, only about half of them will come back to their neighborhoods. New Orleans' pre-Katrina population stood at just under 500,000. Researchers believe that by August 29, 2008, the city will have about 272,000 residents, and most of them will have come back to areas like this one that had little or no flooding. For homes with serious damage caused by 2 to 4 feet of water, researchers predict only 45% of those residents will come back. That could mean a lot fewer black residents.
And what will be left will be a smaller, richer, whiter New Orleans controlled by conservative forces that wanted to get rid of those poor black folk from the very beginning.
Regardless, says Councilwoman Cynthia Willard, displaced residents must be kept informed about any future plans for their storm-ravaged neighborhoods.
And in light of the greatest catastrophic displacement of people, it was almost unthinkable and unconscionable that the folks who were hardest hit were the last and the least advised in the process.
But even for those who have been displaced, the lure of home is still strong, and more are returning, but not to much.
I want to. I'm not certain if I will, but I want to. I mean, I love my neighborhood. I love my house. I mean, I was proud of my house. But I'm not sure.
People need housing, aren't able to get it. You know, trailers are just sitting in Orleans Parish, and they're not even, seem like they're not, you know, and this is the most desperate place right now for the, you know, for the trailers. And we're not getting the help that we need.
On top of that, they say that city officials gave them mixed signals. On the one hand, telling them to come back, while on the other hand, providing them with few of the basic necessities, including lights or water.
I mean, you shouldn't have to fight this hard for your home. You shouldn't have to fight this hard with your insurance company, with your state legislator, with the people who you voted in to elect you. You shouldn't have to fight like this. So, and I think that because other places are being kinder to people and providing them with more opportunities, you know, why would you come back?
But they are. Displaced Katrina residents are finding comfort and strength in each other as they gather in groups such as this one to map out their own strategy for reclaiming their neighborhoods.
I'm seeing some of the most self-determined organizing I've seen in my life. You know, I've never, the organizing that I'm seeing from people who are affected is some of the most inspirational organizing that I may see in my life, you know.
The city's largest public hospital, Charity Hospital, remains shuttered. Officials targeted late 2006 or early 2007 for completion of repairs and cleanup. Yet it could be years, if ever, before Charity Hospital reaches the number of beds and the level of service it offered prior to Katrina. Likewise, many of the city's public schools are still closed and without any firm dates for reopening them. However, an unprecedented number of charter schools have opened, and more are planned. Since most charter schools are independent of school boards, they can operate without the prerequisite of hiring certified teachers.
What is the prospects right now for public schools here in New Orleans?
There is no prospects. As far as whatever the plan is, the public school system will no longer exist. Public school student will have to find elsewhere to be educated, and that means leaving the city.
With few schools open, displaced parents have hesitated to return with their children. But the disturbing loss of children in the neighborhoods is especially noticeable. Groups of children playing like these are hard to find in communities struggling to find their way back.
The children
The many children that we used to see around in this neighborhood all the time are gone because of schools. The public schools are very, drastically reduced in terms of the schools that are around here. So there are no children. And,
It's got to be really bizarre, isn't it?
It's really, it is kind of disheartening.
Just as disheartening to many was the decision by the Catholic Archdiocese of New Orleans to close the historic St. Augustine Church. Founded in 1841 by slaves and free people of color, St. Augustine is the oldest black Catholic parish in the U.S.
The Archdiocese, which is basically white, wants to get rid of that church. But that church is a recruiting process to bring more black folks on because of the culture, not so much of the church, but the culture that surrounded whole communities.
But the Archdiocese says it needed to close and consolidate St. Augustine Parish in order to deal with $84 million in uninsured losses from Katrina. With City Hall strapped for money, many of the city's services were curtailed. So those who do return are once again faced with fending for themselves, even as the haunting memory of one of the biggest governmental failures lingers still fresh in their minds.
With the failure of governmental commitment, with the absence of governmental commitment, with a city government that is broke, with an impoverished state government, with a federal government that appears not to care very much, it means that, bottom line, we have to ask ourselves the question, what are we going to do for ourselves?
According to community activist Jacques Morial, whose own family produced 2 other black mayors of New Orleans, distraught residents should feel disappointed with their local leaders.
That they feel forsaken and forgotten and overlooked by their local government. It's unfortunate, local government has been anything but responsive from even long before Katrina, in the days and hours before Katrina, during the storm, and right after.
This one there, you was the one behind.
Tired of waiting for the government to help them, 67-year-old Israel White and his wife Kim work on their own to clean and restore their home. It is covered with mold and other potentially infectious bacteria, dangerous reminders left behind by more than 4 feet of water that didn't seem to want to leave.
See, it was a long time. It was about a month, 5 or 6 days before they could get in here, period. And then they finally got the water out. That would ruin the house.
Because the water just stagnated.
The water stayed there. The water sat in here so long. See, before it moved out. The water stayed here 30 days or so before it got out of here.
But his decision to go it alone and clean his own home comes at a high risk for Israel White. You see, he has emphysema, and when we found him, he was wearing neither protective clothing nor a mask. His wife admits she knows it's not good, but says they had little choice.
I hate to be doing it, but gotta be done. But I'm glad we was able to survive and salvage as much as we could.
Israel White says he's just grateful to be alive. Not a day goes by, he says, that he doesn't flash back to those harrowing hours he and his wife spent on top of their neighbor's carport. This after they freed themselves from the attic crawl space by hacking through the vent on top of his roof, only to come face to face with a sea of water outside.
But brother, I ain't never seen nothing like this. It's just the worst thing I ever seen in my life.
Did you ever think there were times when you didn't think you were going to make it?
Well, I didn't want to look at, because I pray all the time. And the Lord said, if you pray, don't worry.
I prayed and prayed. Oh, I prayed. I prayed and cried. He kept saying, don't cry, it's going to be all right.
Like thousands of other Katrina flood survivors, Kim and Israel White were rescued by a low-flying Coast Guard helicopter whose pilot spotted them on the roof. If there was one bright spot in the government's response, it was the gallant effort of the Coast Guard. Working nearly around the clock in those frantic and confusing days after Katrina, Coast Guard crewmen hoisted the young, the old, the sick from rooftops and from what surely would have been their watery graves. But there were also many heroes on the ground, including young men like these who hopped into their boats and went door to door rescuing stranded neighbors, especially the elderly.
There was this old lady that went into the house. One went in, lift her up, walked a distance and passed her on. And guess what? She did not touch the water. I'm not speaking about what I was told. I'm speaking about what I witnessed.
In the Treme neighborhood in the 7th Ward, there is a streetwise group of young men who are known as Mama D's Soul Patrol. Her legal name is Diane French Cole. She says that if it had not been for the young men, a lot more people would have died, especially since the government appeared paralyzed to do anything.
It was either go insane, go really mad, or get up and help ourselves here.
Mama D pays special tribute to this young man. His name is Ortegas Coleman. Mama D claims he saved dozens of people while risking his own life.
I don't really stop to think about it. I just try to do what I can do and make sure that people know what I'm going to do. You know, that's about it, man. I don't never think about a hero, never crossed my mind. Just something I feel like God put me on earth to do. The Most High give us strength, give us knowledge and wisdom to do what we, to do the things that we do.
But in the middle of our interview with Mama D, Ortegas came up behind her and whispered something in her ear, something very disturbing. As it turns out, Ortegas informed Mama D that he had just been notified by authorities that the body of his 15-year-old son, Ortegas Jr., had finally been found 6 months later in the rubble of a home. The tragic irony here is that while Ortegas Coleman was able to save so many others, he unfortunately was unable to save one of his own.
The water took when he tried to get out, and my little nephew said he tried to grab him, but he couldn't, and the water took him. But I just wanted to put some closure to it, you know what I'm saying? I wanted if, and I just, just wanted to put a little closure to it. Now I can do that,
Perfect day when the mists have rolled away. We will understand it better by and by.
And 6 months after Katrina, 64-year-old Ron Chisholm buries his 84-year-old mother, Evelyn. Chisholm says that while she managed to survive Katrina, she was never quite the same.
No question in my mind, Katrina was not blaming the storm per se, but the politics of the storm. How people are treated. Versus, I have to do with the pre-Katrina versus the in-between as well as the post-Katrina.
Deaths among the elderly were high. But like Ron Chisholm's mother, many elderly victims died in the months since Katrina, apparently from what is commonly called Katrina-related stress.
All right, but again, this is the clinic. We started the clinic as a first aid station on the 9th.
Malik Rahim, a political activist, has seen more than his share of post-Katrina stress. Veteran of the Black Panther Party, Malik Rahim was so fed up with the lack of government response in the days just after Katrina that he and a few friends decided to open several shelters and emergency health clinics. They named them Common Ground Collective. Its volunteers went where few wanted to go, like into areas that suffered the most, including the lower 9th Ward. This small clinic is located in the relatively unscathed Algiers neighborhood. This grassroots collective has provided vital services on what amounts to a shoestring budget. Compared to the estimated $826 million in relief donations reportedly received by the Red Cross in only 1 month after Hurricane Katrina hit. This clinic is a converted convenience store, complete with examining rooms. The clinic is staffed by an army of volunteers, including doctors and nurses from around the world.
At Common Ground, we have been blessed that we've been, that 80% of our volunteers have been, the outreach we have been making is to the progressive white community.
Among the recent volunteers is Marianne Jenny.
We're from out of state and just wanted to help and be part of this effort because I believe this is a national issue. The whole Katrina disaster that was not taken care of by any level of government. So I think we need a lot of volunteers since no state, local, and especially federal help was given to the city.
As we were videotaping, the group announced that Common Ground Collective had just served its 10,000th patient. While that brought a smile from Malik Rahim, it was little comfort knowing there were still so many more who needed the care offered by Common Ground. Rahim also admits that Katrina revealed an ugly side of humanity that he says even today is hard to believe.
They were shooting at us. Now, there's people fleeing a disaster. When I made the first plea right here, whites was able to roam the street, and they had a right, a constitutional right, to protect their community. But a black better not get caught with a broomstick in his hand. All right, because literally they would kill you.
He says he personally witnessed gun-wielding white men, some in police uniforms, shoot in the direction of blacks who had been advised by Mayor Nagin to leave the chaotic confines of the Superdome and Convention Center and to try to make their way across the bridge over the Mississippi River into the West Bank communities of Algiers and Gretna. Both were dry. But at the top of that bridge, several hundred tired and thirsty evacuees reportedly were ordered by Gretna police to turn around and go back.
Nowhere else in America could you have seen where people was fleeing from a disaster and a whole nother county tell you that because you are black, we don't want you in our county.
Gretna Police Chief Arthur Lawson later admitted that his officers did turn back the group. However, he insisted it wasn't racial, but rather a practical decision since Gretna did not have any way of caring for the group. Katrina was not the cause of New Orleans' deep-seated and historical problems of race, poverty, and exclusion, but it did have its way of exposing it.
I don't know how many people knew it, but this city was in serious trouble before Katrina. Because we had too many people who couldn't fend for themselves, and Katrina made you see that.
We knew racism was here in New Orleans. It wasn't nothing new to us, but the way Katrina did illuminated it for everybody in Chicago and D.C. and New York to see what we were talking about.
Historically black colleges, which suffered hundreds of millions of dollars in damage, are again showing signs of life. Students have already returned to the campus at Xavier University. However, the famed Dillard University campus is still closed for repairs. Buildings here took a direct pounding from the high winds and flooding from Katrina. But even here, there are hopeful signs. For instance, more than 1,000 Dillard students returned. They re-registered, and in a unique arrangement, they live and attend classes at the New Orleans Hilton Hotel.
Being at the Hilton, it's all right. It's not too bad. It's better for me because when I was on campus, I didn't know a lot of people. Whereas since we all close at the Hilton, I get to meet more people.
These 3 students were part of a group evacuated to Dallas, Texas. They said that despite the loss of their personal belongings, they believe Katrina has been a life-changing experience for them.
Don't take life for granted. Live day by day. That's all. That's all I learned, you know.
It's definitely going to help me in the future adapt to things like change and adapt to something that's devastating. Like I had never been through anything this devastating, this so surprising. So now I'll know how to handle surprises. I'll know what to do in the future. Like it's like it just prepares you for something that you can never be prepared for.
African World Studies professor Alan Kalan says he's witnessed significant change in students' attitudes. He says he hopes it will motivate them to social and political action.
We hope, and I certainly do, that this will be a galvanizing, a kind of catalytic experience for them. And I've seen some early evidence that this may be happening.
Community and political activists say they hope that in the aftermath of Katrina, a new national human rights movement will emerge. Within that movement, prominent black leaders hope it will also raise political awareness.
Right to vote now! Right to vote now! Right to vote now!
This demonstration, led by civil rights leader Reverend Jesse Jackson, was called to raise concern about the April elections in New Orleans.
Those that are trying to rob the people of New Orleans of their right to vote, if they can set a legal precedent in New Orleans, they will set a precedent all over this nation. So we did not come as outsiders to New Orleans. We come because what happens in New Orleans will affect our voter rights all over the United States.
The rally was also in support of the rights of all former New Orleans residents to return and rebuild their homes.
We face the common challenge, overcoming long years of cultural separation and moving from racial battleground to economic common ground and to moral higher ground. In this quest across our nation, we seek, number one, to assert a very basic fact, that though our people are in exile, we have the right to return.
While Katrina victims admit they are down, they defiantly declare they are by no means out.
We crippled. But we're not in the wheelchair, and we gonna get up.
I'm hopeful, no doubt.
We expect hurricanes here. We live in a swamp. We know this. I got my batteries, my water, my bleach, all the stuff. I don't eat out of cans, but enough dried fruits and different things. Well, we're gonna survive.
And when those other hurricanes do come, will the levees hold?
I was plenty confident when when they just put the walls up in the, because all this shit did with this since I was living out here, you know what I'm talking about? So since they had put the walls up and everything, I said, oh yeah, we ought to be able to sustain any kind of low flood, so I wouldn't even worry about it, but I seen something I ain't ever seen before, brother. I won't never want to go through that no more. I don't want to be in that much water no more.
I don't want to go through this again.
Perhaps the postscript to Katrina is that it blew the cover off the government's abysmal performance in handling the crisis. It exposed a city's weakness to defend itself and its people, and it tested the outer limits of human tolerance. While there is still a lot to do before New Orleans regains any semblance of its past, there is one thing on which everyone here seems to agree, that with its rich cultural history and the passion of its people, New Orleans will come back, and so will many of those who lost their loved ones and their homes to the nation's worst natural disaster.
they're not letting us. They're talking about
making this a green space.
They're trying to demolish this area, and we're not in agreement with that. But they want to just wipe this whole community out, and this is one of the largest African American communities of homeowners in the city. It may be low income, but you know, so they want to wipe this out, and that would be horrible because he and I were raised here, we met here, we married here, and this is a part of our home.
And we also went through here doing Betsy, and we still down here living. So.
And the levee busted again with Betsy, right?
The levee busted with Hurricane Betsy, and they broke in 2 spots, and plus it also came from the Mississippi River Gulf outlet, a lot of the water. So you know.
Since Katrina had moved and the levee busted maybe 48 hours after Katrina left, do the residents feel that levee was purposely blown?
A lot of residents believe that. But personally, I don't know that it was purposely blown. And I looked at some of the maps, and if you look at this particular area, we're really surrounded by water. And so you have water on all sides of us. So with that said, anything is possible. You know, I'm not gonna just most arbitrarily say it was blown. You know, it's real difficult to say that without proof.
When you talk to your son, tell him I came by and I would like to see him when we get back to school.
His name is Stephen Green. He's a reporter for the Wall Street Journal.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah.
And he lives in Chicago.
May God bless you.
And thank you so much for coming down and giving some exposure.
What we're going to do, because the people don't know, we have no way of knowing what you all went through.
And pictures really, they're not showing everything.
You have to see with your natural eyes.
You know, it's real difficult.
So we're going to bring our cameras and spend a week taking as much of the devastation as we can, talking to the people, and creating a DVD so that the American people and black people in particular can see, and this must be kept in the minds and hearts of our people. Absolutely. So that we don't forget the need. You know?
Absolutely.
So,
well, thank you for coming and thank you. I'm sorry. My name is Wanda. Wanda and Conrad Bailey.
Okay, nice meeting you all.
Thank you.